Good evening from Chicago, Illinois. It's wonderful to have you here, and a number of you are writing your greetings in the chat room from where you are. We're going to begin right now with a welcome from our president, Father Mark Francis. So if Father Mark, you could unmute yourself, that would be wonderful.
A real sincere welcome to all of you who are here. From the beginning of the renewal of religious life and Perfected Caritatis from the Second Vatican Council, the question of how to make relevant the charisms of our various communities was kind of foremost in the minds of everyone at Vatican II. Going back into the sources of our charisms was an extremely important step, I think. But now in the 21st century, the biggest challenge right now is to deal with the amazing number of different people of different cultures who have joined our communities and who seek to have an equal voice in terms of the development of religious life. And so I'm delighted to be part of this conversation, to hear what our experts have to say about how to move forward this movement to make relevant religious life in a globalized world. And so on behalf of CTU, which has always held mission as a very important part of our mission, I welcome you and I look forward to the discussions this evening. So thank you.
Thank you, Father Mark, and thank you also for your support of this project from the beginning and your own lived witness to its importance. So now I have the pleasure of giving you my own welcome. My name is Sister Maria Simperman. I'm a religious of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I teach here at CTU. I'm an associate professor of theological ethics, and I direct our Center for the Study of Consecrated Life. And it's just an absolute delight to have this gathering in so many ways and to have so many of you from all over the world join us. If you just even have a chance to look at the chat, we have, I'm going to miss places because they keep getting added all over the United States, certainly, but also Bolivia, Vietnam, Australia, oh, you could name it. You could look at these, Peru, New Zealand. So it's just, it's a gift. And it also says something about your own commitment to this and your own interest and also the timeliness of this. So it's great to be here and thank you for joining us. I would like to begin with an acknowledgement of place. We have been blessed to be on the land we are each walking on, sitting on, living in. And this is a practice I learned from the people in Australia. And that is, there is no civic or ecclesial event that begins without an acknowledgement there of the Aboriginal people. So here, I would like to acknowledge the tribes of the Illinois, Miami, and Potawatomi, who cared for the land upon which I stand, who cared for the soil, who cared for the lake that I can drink water from. And I thank our God for giving them the insights about this care that they found in all things, and ask our God of all to please help us on this earth, those of us on our different places, to care wisely for the earth, for the air, and for the water, so that we too may allow generations upon generations to live. So thank you. we're in a spot where there is a great deal of turmoil in the United States and in the world with COVID and all kinds of pandemics such as racism, poverty, homelessness, and more. And yet we are here today to see what is possible when we do delve more deeply into our diversity with an appreciation and a desire to grow, rather than to remove what makes us uncomfortable or what we do not know. And I believe that the above mentioned realities can be impacted by our work in engaging interculturality. So we're here to share good news. It's great to publish a book to offer you with the Center for the Study of Consecrated Life. It's our second book, and it's actually the second of 3 books. Another one just came out in September. So this one is a product of a 3-year Train the Trainer program on interculturality. It included 3 years of conferences, 20 congregations. I recognize some of the faces here. 20 congregations brought teams together to go more deeply into this area and call to conversion and practice. And so what you have here is a book that contains essays from the presenters in our first 2 conferences. Just so that you know, these panelists this evening have not all been together. 2 of them were in the first year and the others were in our second year of conferences. So it's actually a wonderful moment where everyone can actually see and hear from one another at this time. So it's a real gift to be able to do that. The essays were turned over a year ago into the process of publication. And we're very grateful for Maryknoll Books for publishing this, for seeing over the course of their 50 years, the importance of engaging across cultures, across every area, in order to really witness to the reign of God, longing to break forth evermore. So tonight we celebrate a book launch. So we've now launched the book. If we were all together in a pre-COVID moment, we would have you with us, but we enjoy being able to share this probably even more widely. The gift of this book and the conversations even more that we hope will be generated, and the efforts across consecrated life and well beyond. This has implications for the people of God. And so we're grateful to be able to share this with you. So I'm grateful to the Spirit that led us to this project, to CTU, where this effort is just part of the air we breathe, to the Hilton Foundation, and particularly the Catholic Sisters Initiative, which really believed in this project and funded it and gave us opportunities to just experiment and work in all kinds of ways across all kinds of borders. So doing a lot of bridge building. And so before all kinds of other groups were doing this, they encouraged us to do this. And now we find ourselves in common cause with so many others who are engaged with this. We are happy to be with you in this and invite you to engage in this conversation. We're going to have the panelists do so first, and then invite you as well. We invite you to, if the Spirit moves you, get a copy of the book. It's an ebook as well as a physical book, and to get into conversations about this and help the movement that the Spirit is clearly asking of us. So what I'd like to do though first is to introduce our speakers. And I'm going to do it simply by using their self-introductions. And then I'm going to move to the questions that you already saw when you registered. So first of all, I want to welcome Joanne Haruko Doi, a Maryknoll sister, who served among the Aymara people in Peru for 11 years and is now very involved in the spiritual practice of reconciliation in the pilgrimage journeys to former World War II Japanese American detention camps. She currently teaches here at CTU in the Intercultural Studies and Ministry of the Department. Sister Tere Maya, an Incarnate Word sister from San Antonio, holds a PhD from El Colegio de Mexico in Mexico City. And she has a passion for the formation of ministers for Hispanic and Latinos in the United States. She currently serves as congregational leader for her congregation and is a former president of LCWR. Dr. Kevin McClone is a licensed clinical psychologist, and he's an adjunct faculty member here at CTU, and he's director of the Institute for Sexuality Studies. He serves as a consultant to religious communities of men and women on topics such as healthy formation, intercultural dynamics, and addiction recovery. Yungun Sophia Park, a Holy Names sister, is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Holy Names University in California. Her publications include Border Crossing Spirituality, Transformation in Borderland. Her interest is in biblical and cross-cultural spirituality and in religious life from post-colonial and global feminist perspectives. My colleague and co-editor here with this project is Roger Schroeder, SVD, a professor of intercultural studies and ministry, and the Louis J. Lusbitic, SVD, professor of mission and culture at CTU. He has publications which include What is the Mission of the Church, a guide for Catholics, and with Steve Bevan's Constance in Context, a theology of mission for today. Robert J. Schreider, a precious blood priest, is unfortunately not able to be with us, but asked that we send his best wishes for this gathering and for this time together. Sia Nyasari Tamu, a Maryknoll sister of Tanzania, lives in an intentional intercultural community in Nairobi, Kenya, where she is a member of the Maryknoll Sisters Peace Building team. She's been a facilitator of the Conversations for Social Change program in different parts of Kenya that were experiencing conflict. And she actually wins the prize for the one of our panel who is up the earliest, and because it's 8 hours ahead. So good morning to you, Sia, and to everyone else, good evening. What I'd like to do is just begin with our questions and invite first Joanne Haruko to look at it, and then the others in turn. And the first question is simply this: what were a few key learnings and insights for you related to interculturality and consecrated life, which you shared in your essay? So it's not meant to be a summary, but just a couple key points. So we're just going to do this in alphabetical order and begin with Haruko, please. And you'll have to all unmute yourselves when you speak. Thank you.
I've only been doing this for 6 months. Thank you. But seeing you hold up the book cover, it's a beautiful cover. And even as I see it, in your distance there, it really looks like the dawn. So as I was contemplating the cover, I thought, hopefully we'll arrive at the dawn, but there's still a lot of colors that are in the shadows. So my topic, and I did this in, together with Dr. Michelle Andraus, who's now in Canada at a different university, but we both were looking at pilgrimages to basically sites of shadow sites to reconnect to painful memories. So his was a canoe pilgrimage with the First Nations people in Canada as part of the reconciliation process there. And mine was to the Manzanar internment camp site or detention camp. And I don't know if you can see over my shoulder, that's the cemetery obelisk. That's the focal point of the pilgrimage. But so to just give you a couple of the insights, basically, as I reread my article, this paragraph jumped out at me. So I think the easiest way is for me to read some from this paragraph. So it's really about facing the shadows, and it's about a process of reconciliation and reparations through memory. So even to remember our whole story. So this process involves recognizing the trauma and losses involved. And this inevitably raises the need for appropriate emotional response, understanding, and, you know, in light of what's happening today, the development of a political culture that promotes the conditions for emotional well-being. Now, in other words, emotional well-being is not limited to positive feelings, but also grows out of the energy for good that is released when one revisits a negative or difficult emotions. So we need to honor these difficult emotions and give them a chance to teach us what it is we need to know. And here I wanted to reference Bob Schreider's chapter, basically page 106, where he talks about silence as grammar, because that's very much what happens on at least the Manzanar pilgrimage. So it's important to reframe mourning or grieving as an act of courage rather than humiliation. It is an act of resistance rather than submission, to feel the full range of emotions. The capacity to enter in this process together provides an experience of related vulnerability that paradoxically results in a sense of shared strength as we experience a new or restored unity. So these extraordinary predicaments that are unfortunately becoming normal of collective trauma require a different form of mourning process that includes victims, perpetrators, and all those in between, who are often the next generations. So it is this listening to the silence and listening to the earth. I think that's also what Dr. Andras and I had in common, was land holds memory. So it was, the pilgrimages are really to specific land or geographic sites. And it's really an ancestral listening, I think, that begins to teach us what it is we need to know. And in Bob Schreider's chapter, he relates it really to a spirituality and contemplative practices, and even the silence of God. So I would ask to read his chapter to get sort of the connections with consecrated life. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much. Great beginning. Tada, would you share next?
Well, hello to everyone. I'm really impressed that so many of you are here with us today. And first, I also brought the book. So, you know, Maria, you can, you know, tell we're reading it. But thank you to CTU for these workshops, and second, also for producing this book that's going to be very helpful to many of our institutes. About my mini essay in this book, I think the first thing that I'd like to highlight is that our call to embrace more intentional intercultural living is not happening on a blank slate. So following what Joanne said, we have a history of how we've done difference and diversity and even immigration in our institutes, and we need to know it. And we need reconciliation with our own history. One of the things that I highlight is that the way we dealt with difference was with the paradigm of assimilation. And this remains embedded in our story until we realize that we cannot move forward with the same process into the future. So we need to almost unlearn that assimilation paradigm. And it's not that simple, because it shows up in many different ways. You know, you hear it all the time, institutes all over, especially in the United States, but also institutes that are international and have a center of gravity kind of in the Western world, where you say, you know, you're in America, speak English, or this is how I learned to be in community, or, you know, if it worked for me, it should work for them. In countless different encounters, I find that it is just as important to look at our own history and the way our communities do difference as to learn all the intercultural competencies. But unless we look very honestly on how we do this, it is very difficult for these competencies to really take hold and allow us to move into this new moment that we're being called to live into. So my take is, let's look at what is actually happening, at the statistics, at the numbers, at the shift from the global north to global south, even for international institutes. Let's look then also at how we did difference in our history with all the diversities, not just racial or ethnic, but all the different cultures, whether it was, different parts of the country, different theologies, different ways of thinking. How do we recognize that and move forward? So those are my 2 cents, Maria.
I don't know, 2 cents is so valuable right now. We're getting more than 2 out of 100. Thank you. Kevin, please.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be with you and to see so many wonderful people. Some faces I recognize and some I don't know, but just to see that we have the globe here. And, and I'm going to also hold up the book. So, and I also want to give my great thanks to, Maria and Roger for an incredible job of putting this all together. And like I said, I was honored to be a part of it. I also want to give, mention to Crystal Dietz, who Taylor Dietz, who worked with me. She's a psychologist, works out of St. Luke Institute, and it was a real pleasure to work with her on this. My 2 cents was really in dealing with the complexities of culture and personality. And so looking, I looked at a couple different things like primarily the 5-factor model, but in talking with Crystal and then having the opportunity to present this to at CTU, there were some key insights. I'd just like to highlight a few of them. First of all, I have a good friend who's a physician, a doctor, and when she was a child, she had damage to her visual cortex. And so just one day she was saying to me, she said, "Kevin, you don't see what I see, and I don't see what you see." And for her, that was just a literal statement. She does not see what I see because she sees shadows and but I kept thinking about that as it related to culture and personality and the complexities involved in that how hard it is, how difficult it is to have conversations around this because of, as some of the speakers have mentioned, the complexities. And even, so one of the points I guess I'd like to make is that no matter what we do, I'm always going to be missing something. And that leaves me humble to be open to learn more. So I think it's a good stance to have. We're all unique. And when we talk about individuality as well as it deals with culture, personality is such a complex phenomenon. And what the 5-factor model does is looks at can make cross-cultural comparisons because you've got these cultures that are more universal, right? And although that's not foolproof either. There's critiques about that from certain cultures. But it gives a way of having a conversation and of going deeper into comparing from one culture to another. So the study of personality is focused on the study of these traits. And if you want a simple way to remember them, you can think of OCEAN, and which is kind of the acronym. And O stands for openness, and C stands for conscientiousness, and E stands for extroversion, A for agreeableness, and N for neuroticism. And I won't go through in detail with all of them. But what it points out to me in looking at this, especially when you start to look at, well, what is culture, right? And what is personality? And it's not always easy to decipher what that is. But what it does, I think, is it enhances our understanding because it says we can't think that we know culture because we know certain things about a culture, that not every person is going to identify with the culture in the same way. right? And so individual differences, the complexity of personality, of gender roles, of personal narratives, of, as Joanne was saying, trauma experiences, everybody's going to be at a different stage there, but it begins to have us have a conversation. So I think it's a delicate balancing act to try to put those two together. But it's a beginning, and I think that's it for now. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you for that. I think we're going to add up to 100 no matter what. So could we please hear from you, Sophia?
Hey, hello, everyone. Thank you for making this wonderful book. Do you hear me? Okay, so.
Yes.
Ta-da. My chapter concerns intercultural spirituality as an art of living led by the Holy Spirit, along with the immigration history in the US. I read Acts, a multifocal drama which shows the movement of the church to the other through examining 3 distinct yet interrelated dimensions of multicultural, cross-cultural, and intercultural living. The moment of Pentecostal experience in chapter 2 emphasized the virtue of listening rather than speaking in their tongue. Receiving upon the Holy Spirit, the diaspora Jews spoke in a foreign language or even with a very heavy accent. Then they all heard and understood. Miracle. I believe it is the essential point of multicultural dynamics as the beginning point journey toward the other. And then cross-cultural dynamics that occur encountering other create tensions, discomfort, conflicts, and boundary crossings. The act does not hesitate to describe this reality because the Holy Spirit guides all things. Like a montage, from chapter 6 to 8, the narrative sketches various border crossing aspects. And finally, in chapter 8, Philip, a marginalized member from Greek diaspora, took authority and freedom to baptize a foreigner from Egypt. And finally, intercultural dimension indicates an open negotiation or discerning process for the new reality. In chapter 10, Peter and Cornelius dance together, in which Cornelius becomes the subject, Peter the other, or vice versa. In this intercultural dance, the early Christian community let go of Jewish-centeredness and let the new people and the community come. In conclusion, I address the virtue of listening and a new understanding of border crossing, as well as openness of letting go and letting come in new era. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think as you're listening, you're hearing that listening and dialogue are so key in any kind of intercultural conversion or working towards that. And Bob Schreider would have gone next, and we've already heard references to it. It's really a stunning essay, and what he does in there is literally move his work, which many of you know, on reconciliation and forgiveness towards like the 2.0 level, which is what is the role of silence? And he speaks to the many kinds of silence and listening. So you'll enjoy that. Roger, could we hear from you, please?
Yes. First of all, it's really appreciated being able to work with you, Maria, on the book, and everything is really good. And I guess what I'd want to say is I'd like to go beyond the book also with the 21 congregations that we accompanied over these 3 years. And many of you are on the screen here tonight and that, and I think just really to thank you for your willingness to engage this topic of interculturality, because, you know, God's reign is built in people, and people make changes. And how does that happen in communities? And I think that was a real goal, and that's what we hope the book continues to do. But I think I really want to, congratulate, thank, I really respect the work that the 21 congregations have done. And this is continuing to mushroom around the world in many different ways. So again, I want to thank all of you for your participation in this. In the chapter that I contributed to this, I co-authored this. We worked together with Maria Hong Nguyen. She's a Vietnamese American Benedictine sister. I worked with her in the past. We did the work in terms of the social-centric and individual-centric societies. So what this does is sort of look at the framework, a framework to understand cultural difference. And the social-centric, where the well-being of the group is of primary importance, individual-centric, well-being of the individual is primary importance. These are frameworks, they're not written in stone, but Maria and I have done workshops with religious communities, and I like doing it together because Maria is Asian-born, a woman in a religious community. I myself is a male, US-born, as white, and that if we can do this together, I think it models something that it is possible to communicate and understand each other's worlds. And to me, this is really important. In the book itself too, we also have some case studies at the end that during the conference when we did this, we had people break into and discuss these case studies, which I think is very helpful because, again, we're moving from theory to practice. We're not just talking about the theory, but what does it mean in practice when you have hard decisions to make that are, it's around cultural and personalities too, as Kevin was saying. And this chapter gives us a chance for a cultural framework of understanding the difference. How do we name the difference, bridge the difference, and integrate the difference? And very much so, having the cultural knowledge is one thing, but if you do it without a spirituality, you're not going to go far. And I thank you, Sophia, for the work you did with Acts the Apostle. That's my favorite book also. And then, in terms of, you can have all the knowledge you want in your head, but if your heart is not transformed into seeing the other as your sister and brother, then you're not going to go any place with this. So I think this is how I think these various chapters interrelate with each other. Okay, that's my 2 cents.
So 2 more cents, please. Sia, thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody, and good morning for some of you, and good afternoon, wherever you are. Like everybody else, I'm really grateful for Maria and Roger, and for all of us for giving us space to really engage our diversity. My chapter in this book is titled Methodology. Conversation is a methodology for interculturality, conflict, and reconciliation. So this topic itself comes from my own lived experience, living in intentional intercultural community with my 2 sisters. One is from Vietnam, born, though living in the US now, and another one from the US, myself from Tanzania. It became a constant blend of how to dance that complexity among us, and the conversation became a tool which helped us really to go deeper and look at our own issues at a respectful way of saying that, yes, each one of us has that what is called the dignity of difference. We bring ourselves into that conversation with all our layers of culture, from our family of origin, where we came from, what we have in our own background, all that we bring it there, knowing that it's all different. So one of the things is, each one of you, you are showing your book. My book is here. The hard copy is still traveling. The things I will emphasize in when I say, one of the insights I got into this is, each time we say we are doing intercultural living, what exactly we are trying to do is, we are seeking to understand and we are seeking to sustain that. So when we are seeking to understand, basically we are being open, as Kevin said, we are so complex with all these complex cultures. So you seek to understand from the other person because we all have our own different perception of filters. What you see is not what I'm seeing. My assumptions, unless I check them, they mean just my own stories. But when I check them with you, then they become real. So for me, at this point, with my 2 sentences, I will say, as we enter into intercultural living, as we engage our diversity, let's go deeper, clarify our assumptions, check our assumptions, and therefore knowing that we each carry our own perception of filters. We see the world differently, depends on which lenses we wear, and our lenses are influences with so many layers, depends on where we come from. And be patient, be compassionate, be patient with each other. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sia. Just briefly, I have a little essay in there that speaks to what's at stake in this. And I think you heard some of that. Everything is at stake in this. So just looking at it from the lens of religious life, and I'm teaching a course on the vowed life right now, and 60 people from around the world, 70 in it, and engaging across generations, congregations. But what's at stake in our work in interculturality has to do with every one of the vows. It shifts our understanding, will be dynamic in this. And it also includes how we look at prayer, community, and ministry. And it has everything to do with the relationships we extend beyond ourselves. So for me, there was so much in it. And yet, living in a community that is multicultural and seeking to live into being intercultural, what you realize is that it takes time. It takes listening. It takes dialogue. So as Sia said, it's a real intentional effort. So whether we come across generations or continents, which is what we do, all of that is so key. So there's so much. And there are 8 other essays in here that are just equally fine, amazing, and just transformative. People that are reading this in my class are just going, this is so helpful. So I just invite you to engage it. We also want to, we asked the people on the panel if they would think about one more question. And that's what we always try to do. We don't just say, here we are. We appreciate where we are and what we've learned. And then we ask, ¿Qué más? What next? What more? What's calling? And so the question to our colleagues here is, what have you been thinking about in terms of interculturality and consecrated life since this presentation or paper you wrote? Like, what are your thoughts and senses of direction calling us next? So I'm just going to go backwards on that one and then just invite them for conversation. And then we will invite you to enter into the dialogue with questions or comments in the chat. And then we have a new announcement at the end of another initiative. So, so Sia, what have you been thinking about since this? Like, where do you sense things calling?
Since I presented in the conference and wrote my chapter, my congregation, Myrno Sisters, have been really engaging what we say engaging our complexity. We have realized that diversity, yes, but we need to go deeper. And when we go to the deep diversity, which calls to see each individual, even if we were American born, you were socialized different, and that makes you a complex human being, just the layers of the way you were socialized. So I have been engaged in that, in facilitating that, of engaging our complexity. And one of the things which I have been working on, even myself, and I think it's an ending job, is to look at our own personal values as well as our organizational values. And when I say to look at the values, for me, what it means, values are not just cold objective words. Values are so deep in such a way that the only way we can talk about it, let's say a value of respect, the only way is to start appealing, what does respect mean to you? What does respect mean to the other person? So that we create a space where every member can share from her own perception of filter, from her own background, from her own culture. What does that value mean, especially when we come into this religious life, which is so international, intercultural, that we bring a lot of differences because we didn't grow up together. We come together as adults, which are already socialized. So to be able to share that, that has been my part. I'm going deeper and deeper in peeling and understanding more and more of the complexities in these values. And that calls me to look at our cultural audit of our admission process. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Roger.
Yeah, for me, what's really taken a hold of me in the last 6 months has been the whole question of racism and anti-racism. And this has just grabbed a hold of me. And I really see now, at least certainly in the US, that if we're going to talk about interculturality, we've got to talk about racism and power. These are two things that I just feel have really grabbed a hold of me in different ways. So through my reading and teaching and other things and other projects and things like that. So for me, the racism, I mean, it was always there, but now it's really lifted its head, and it's just something that I think is just very key for us. And I don't mean just in the US, but certainly in the US, we need to look at this. Okay.
Thank you. Sophia.
Yes, now we are living in an era of uncertainty with enormous feelings of fear and isolation in this COVID era. However, COVID has revealed our current reality of disparity between the poor who do not have any resources to keep their lives and the rich who enjoy the surplus product. We witness injustice and violence in terms of gender and race. And we experience now weather crisis and natural disaster. Since March, we have worked through Zoom, opening the Zoom era. And I found that many young people, including my student, work overtime as essential workers. Globalization and capitalism seems nothing new, but the current one is dangerous and brutal in terms of scale. Like Julian of Norwich vision, we become a small village where we influence one another. I witness more people engaging globally through Zoom and the other SNS. We are invited to be social poets through social friendship, as the Pope suggests in the new encyclical, the Fratelli Tutti. In this new time and this crisis, I think of revolution. Inverse the social cultural order and revolve, turn, or circle around many social, political, cultural positions. According to Jacques Lacan, Copernicus' revolution does not lie in awareness of Earth not being center, but revolving nature of the Earth. Following his insight, we experience different social locations by revolving. We can stand on multiple social locations through global friendship. We perhaps lose a sense of center, which is the location of Holy Spirit, actually not ours. Now, I believe it's time to work together, turn together to restoring humanity, regaining human friendship through networking and collaboration, leaving behind any sense of centeredness and authority. Many people ask now, how, where can we start? I wanna say, small is beautiful. We are getting smaller. It's all right, more than all right. The dream, the Jesus movement, and begin a small act of human relationship and friendship. Listen and hold one another. Then we can start our new way of religious vocation, embracing all kinds of otherness and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Kevin, what have you been thinking about? You have to unmute.
Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute myself. I said I've been thinking about way too much. But I've been reading an awful lot of books lately on systemic racism. You know, I've just finished Caste and a couple of other books, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And one of the things, I had this wonderful conversation with my son, you know, and we were talking about a couple of the publicized massacres that had happened in history. And I said, did you ever learn that in school? And he said, no. And I talked about what I learned in school. And it just occurred to me that we really have there's just a great opportunity now for education in this area, and people are open to have these conversations. I mean, 10 of the last, I think 12 national Times bestsellers have been books on racism and interculturality. And so I think the world is ripe and ready for this, given a lot of the things that have happened lately. Not that it hasn't been an issue all along. The other thing I thought of was how hard this is to do, but what are some of the skills that are necessary? And then I thought of, how do you build empathy? You know, and I heard a number of the other speakers talk about this. How do you get people to really listen deeply to one another? And then once that happens, how do we create an environment in which we can have meaningful conflict resolution and reconciliation? Because this is not easy. I can think of some communities where I've been called in to work, and it is very difficult because there's a lot of hurt, sometimes over a long time. And you know, when Joanne was talking about, you know, trauma, I could really relate to, not from as much from my own experience, but from hearing people's stories, you know. And so that's another thing that strikes me in terms of what I've been thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you. And you work at that intersection of the praxis of it. So it's good to hear that. That's a key area as well. And you've been hearing a few people speak to the realities of racism and needing to attend it. This is your little commercial. Don't leave at the end, because we have an announcement about that. So, and now could we hear please from Tada? What have you been thinking about?
Well, first of all, I've been thinking, when is this thing going to be over and we can go back to normal? But with regards to the book, you know, nothing starts all of a sudden. I think the first thought that, as I got the book and read it, in light of what's happened the last few months, and several have mentioned all the issues, was that I think the intuition that we needed to do this work has been confirmed. It's almost like we had an insight and this a discernment, and this is the confirmation. We absolutely need to do this work. In the book, I actually was surprised by my own, you know, it's good to read yourself later, but I did say nothing short of an examination of conscience is necessary to unpack our racism and discrimination toward minority groups. How else can we unlearn the paradigm of the past that continues to inform the present moment? So when I reread that, I realized all of us, the communities that went to CTU, the institutes that are trying to figure out how to do this for a number of years, have been trying. Now we know we absolutely have to do it. I think this whole concept of racism, of systemic racism, but I think this is a new moment, because what I am seeing in the last few months, you know, I'm hearing sisters say, you know, I'm reading this book, like, you know, Brian Massengiel's book that was published, I don't know how many years ago, or I'm reading this and I'm thinking, finally, you know, people are really entering into this work, and it's been very painful. You know, the realization that all of us at some levels have some kind of bias around some of these issues, and just entering into it, into the vulnerability and the shame of recognizing it, create a new space for us to do some of this work. I think that's my first piece. I also think that international institutes, especially those that had a lot of missionaries that went to the global south, are now seeing the reverse migration. And that is also obligating a new kind of conversation. It wasn't the same thing when the treasurer or the money or the authority or the power in an institute was held by a certain group. As the shifts that are beginning to happen in leadership, in the center of gravity of institutes, and that's creating a whole other conversation that like Sia said, we need to look at ourselves, even those institutes that felt that we were, really good at this. I'm reminded of Mary Johnson's work, which I also want to recommend, this book called Migration for Mission, because I also think it's important for us to recognize that now the United States is a new destination for sisters and brothers and priests that are coming to do mission here. And our own reaction to that, I think, shows some of our own unconscious bias. So this is the time for, like, Fratelli Tutti. Of course, I would have called it Fratelli et Sorelli Tutti, but that's a whole other conversation. The idea of encounter and re-encounter, I think it works in Spanish very well. Encuentro, reencuentro. And to recognize that to have a reencuentro, sometimes you needed to have a desencuentro, a disencounter, which doesn't sound very good in English. So the call to conversion, the call to conversation and transformation has a spirit, it's a spiritual task. There's an honesty that is required of all of us, and we have to do this work. So I'm very happy that we have a tool that will help us, and at the same time, to address other diversities, like the increasing polarization around our country, theological polarization, the way we label one another, even inside our own institutes, requires another kind of work. And I think in the way God has created a new movement, and we were getting ready for it, but now we have to catch up with it. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you for that lens and context. Haruko, please, a few words, and then we're going to move to inviting in the chat, if you would, any questions that you might like to ask the group or someone in particular.
So our chapter was Intercultural Decolonial Pilgrimage Journeys. And so I put this in my little notes to myself. I wanted to bring up, so California just passed this Assembly Bill 3121 to set up a task force to begin to look at reparations for slavery in California. And they're hoping it will lead into some federal, gesture of reparations. When I look at our two pilgrimages, both Manzanar and the Canoe pilgrimage, the Manzanar pilgrimage, it occurred before 1988 when there was a reparations bill in the US. But that opened the doors really to continue this practice, which is what opened the door to my studies. I wanted to understand, I thought this was just a political strategy for us to get redress, but it continued with much more fervor, and so much of the stories could then emerge because the shame around what happened had lifted. And there was also a recognition on a systems or structural level. So that gesture is really key. So the Canoe pilgrimage was really initiated by the Jesuits, and they're participating in both church and state gestures of reconciliation towards First Nations people. In the church, really, their involvement in the residential schools. So what can consecrated life communities do? Do we have some culpability or some complicity? What kind of actual gestures can we make to groups? Or like you started this whole evening with the recognizing the land, what land do we sit on and have nurtured our community lives on? I know at Marino, our ecological office actually found an ancient stone and has made that like a center part of a garden to recognize the world, but to kind of recognize the earth itself also. So it is, so I'm kind of all over the board, but it's just how do you bring both a system, like we all suffer from the systemic racism. So any structural violence, we are all suffering from it, but in different ways. So we do kind of our different homeworks, and peoples that have been, quote, victims need to do kind of a decolonializing effort to even to know what their story or history was. But then to move together in that shared vulnerability by recognizing the hurt on both sides, or the impact on dehumanizing both sides in different ways, I think is really important to do together. How can religious communities participate in that, lead that, or be led in that, I guess is my question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Just two quick points. When I was thinking about, I'm always thinking about religious life, but in the world. And I was thinking ad extra. Michelle Andreos in May did an incredible keynote on what's calling us next, and really moved us to where the indigenous people's voices, the native peoples, where are the areas, and so many are mentioning other areas in there. A second piece of it is, I think what people really also need right now are examples of interculturality. Because we keep talking about going toward it, but I would just love to start putting together a little listing of where did these distinctions and complexities create the new? Like, what got created when you really allowed this to happen? And to bring that into religious life, but certainly it's a bigger question. But I often find people going, but give me an example of where that happened in this and this. So I think it's, as we're trying to live into this, that will be a wonderful exercise, and even our own examine of what part yes, what part still, because it's a lifelong journey. So I would love to just hear from any of you. We've done our talking, and would love to just, are there questions? Please, in the chat is the easiest with 200 people. We'll just give you a moment to think about that. And while you're doing that, maybe one of the other panelists will say, as I'm listening to everybody, I'm thinking this. Yeah, please. And please, the rest of you, please write if you have a question, or you have to unmute.
Unmute yourself, Sia.
You're still muted. Now you're unmuted. No, you're still muted.
There. Oh, cool.
Go ahead. You were oh.
There. Now, talk.
You should be okay.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things as I listen to all of us share, the key word for me is awareness. Awareness of who we are and the challenges we encounter, but also the gift we bring, so that uniqueness. So that word awareness, I feel that it's so huge that if we are keen to that, then we can create space to listen to one another with the compassion that this person is trying to communicate what he or she has, to be heard in ways that we can. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Maria, let me chime in. There's a couple of questions about preparing people and what is it, assumptions at a structure level. But I think one of the key things from hearing, especially about that pilgrimage and that restoration piece that Joanne mentioned, is we need to let our own members talk about their stories. We need to create spaces for wholesome and safe conversation. And I'll use an example. I think I was in last year when you could travel and meet people. And I mentioned the story of some of my Irish sisters when they came to the US. And I said, how they had been sent, for example, to accent training school because they had a brogue and they didn't speak English with an American accent, which is the only good way to speak English, apparently. And so I mentioned that story, and I said how it took us a while to even recognize that there was some trauma for many of them. In the audience, there were several Irish sisters, and two of them sat down with me and started talking and just telling me everything that they had lived through when they first came to the US more than 60 years ago. And when they were done, you know, I thought they had told the story many times. And their congregational leader told me that is the first time I ever hear them tell that story. So I think for religious life, unless we create safe spaces for members to share what they have gone through, what they have lived through, it is very difficult to move on to the next piece. So that's just the first part, is we need to convene these conversations in a healthy, wholesome way, and very respectfully as well.
And that's a great point. Actually, one of the 20 congregations had that as their project. As a part one, was across the province and across the United States, and they literally did that online so that people would be in in diverse conversations, and said everyone has a story. And so so thank you for that. That's and to say, how do we do this in our congregations, and calling us to that. Thank you for that, Tere. We do have a question about how do you check out assumptions on a structural level? And I would even say policies in our own congregations. So not just outside, but also within. What skills, how do people do that? How do you look at your own documents and say, where's that calling us forward in, and where are there some assumptions that we really don't want to make in there? And I'm going to throw the second one out too, so that a variety of people can go at it. The second, another question, actually, there's more, is in this day and age, can cultures stay isolated? Apparently there was a New York Times article that talked about a town that was virtually isolated, and they weren't seeking to be racist or not inclusive, but it seems like that'll be so seldom that we're going to find that, but we do find that, and maybe that's where we don't have the conversations that we need. But I don't know if Sophia, you had your hand up to answer one of those responses. Perfect.
Okay, it is not the answer, but I just one small idea about that. I talk a lot about we have to examine our assumption, and then many sisters say that, how do I know my assumption? So I said, you know what? Unless you start to dance, you don't know how this dance goes. And very often, we very often say that we needed to create a space. Then how? We just talk about it. And then also, my community also tried to create dialogue. We are scared to death. We don't want to go to that much kind of, emotional. And also in our American culture, pretty much about healing work is very individualistic, not necessarily interpersonal. So it is very challenging. So kind of I'm thinking about very practical thing. We need a certain medium. And then because we also suffer from kind of disparity, we all different, it is kind of multicultural society. We all, it's okay to difference, but still, and in a way lose form, but still how we embrace one another. For us, it is gospel value or Jesus movement, right? Then I'm thinking about that, what kind of medium can we share? What kind of common story? I'm thinking about Thomas Merton when he went to East, saw the huge mountain, and then he got certain experience, and then all of a sudden he just wondered from the other side, how does it look like? So it is almost like we have to really turn around whole area, but not easy to say that what is your assumption? Rather, we need kind of certain text, gospel, or our constitution, through which we can see what is our very particular lens, and then we just exchange our lens.
Thank you for that. I'm going to add another question to it. We have here, what is the normative culture of intercultural groups? It's a great question to bring to this group. Is it the culture of the place or the culture of the dominant group of the community, or an interculturally co-constructed culture that seldom happens? So what does this group think about that? Sia, do you have an offering for that?
Yeah, I have an idea. I mean, just an idea to add there. So the normative culture of the intercultural group, if the group, there is no one which is so dominant, then they will create the culture of their own by each one bringing the layers of culture they care, by starting talking about the values, and then they have a conversation in each value. I'll give you an example. If we are talking of, let's say, Merno Sisters, which is a missionary congregation, it's international, but was founded in the US. Even though we have a diverse membership from many cultures in this world, still the dominant culture is the Irish, I would say, US culture, most of it Irish, England, you know, those who from the East Coast. However, as we continue, you know, there are so many from different cultures. We recognize that as a normative culture. We have to name it, because the whole issue of how do we negotiate this, we have to be able to name what it is. We need to be able to own it, and then from there negotiate it, as Sophia said, to really start talking about it, and even the uncomfortabilities, to be able to own those emotions. So if we were not now in any group which is more, the culture which is more than the other, we are, let's say, a Tanzanian, a Vietnamese, a US, a Korean, from Brazil, then we will create a normative culture of our own based on the values which we have talked about it, we have chosen to own them, and then we continue re-examine, is this value still serving us? Because they are not written on stones. They are dynamic, they are lived. If it's not serving us anymore, then we see what has emerged, what are we embracing? So it stays in that conversation of continue checking on the assumptions, dialoguing on that, and see what works at the moment and what is the foundation. So you have to have a foundation. Thanks.
Haruko, please.
So I guess I wondered, do we have to have a normative culture? And I guess I have heard the term host culture. So I think I'd like to encourage a culture of hospitality, no matter which culture that is, rather than which one is setting the norms. So I think it's just a different entrance or perspective to be a culture, because then there's a sense of, if you're a hospitable culture or person, there's a sense of welcoming and interest and curiosity that I think can create an intercultural space, versus, you know, am I the normative culture? Then that means I predominate. I don't know. It's just a different, a slightly different way to enter into how do we talk about it, maybe. Go ahead. I see Sophia. I want to call on.
Yes, I really agree with you, because this question itself, when we ask about what is the normative, it sounds like almost pretty descriptive. And in a way, we understand culture, a very solid entity rather than flowing and movement. So, you know, so you talk about the hospitality, and then I have to talk about my Korean Asianness here, kind of, you know, Tao is like a water, living water, like a flow. And then, but we have to be very diligent, because maybe for us, our group, we all bring out, this is the culture today, but you know, tomorrow it is already past. Like a little boy said, what is tomorrow? Oh yeah, you go to bed tomorrow, you know, wake up in the morning, it is tomorrow. So the boy woke up in the morning, Mom, is this tomorrow? No, it is today. Okay, no, tomorrow. Gosh, yes, right? So culture is a living entity. And then every moment we have to discern. And then what is the Holy Spirit, how He guide us. And then in terms of our kenosis, and then just like a poetic art work of hospitality, we just go through. So if we want to try, the answer, I think already wrong because culture already moved.
And Roger, I thought you had a hand there. Did you have something you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one of the people in the group too also mentioned this, but I think this idea of normative culture net, I think it comes out from understanding of power and how power is used or misused. I mean, hospitality to me is the opposite of the power question. But again, power is a reality. And I think we have to be able to acknowledge what is the power. And Terry before was talking about where's the money, who makes the decisions and things like that. And I think that's the other side of it. I mean, I think the goal of interculturality is that, again, what we're talking about, the hospitality and the respect and that's it. But I think when we try to confront that, it can, I think we have to deal with the question of power. Someone else asked a question too about how do you deal with institutional racism or something like that. And I think that's an extremely difficult challenge. And what I have found is that there are some resources online, programs now that are offering resources for if you want to deal particularly with the institutional racism question. I think that's a very, people are dealing with it, but I don't know how well it's working out, but that's where I'm turning to, because I think that's a very, very particular thing. Maybe one of the panel members knows more about working on that area itself, but I think that there are resources out there online and things like that, again, I think we have to keep going beyond, and we need to keep going to people who have worked on this.
Maria, if I may follow on what Roger said, there's several comments on the chat about, check out implicit bias, that Harvard project. And I think one of the things I've been learning is that in some cases, the Catholic Church has fallen behind in some of this from what even some multinational corporations are doing. So, so the competency training, it's almost like try everything, and some things are not going to work. There's a question from someone, and I wanted to underline this. It says, how to engage the people in a project, etc., not just sending at a meeting, workshop, or dialogue, and then nothing happened. So I think one of the mistakes we make as religious institutes is that we get the speaker, we have the workshop, and then we think miraculously the next week, all of our sisters or brothers are going to be ready, like super hospitable to cultural difference. It takes time. Maria mentioned that earlier. This is almost a lifelong process. I have been with groups that said, we've already done the workshop. And I'm thinking, okay, every time, like Sophia says, every day is today. There's someone that arrives new that changes the chemistry in a community. So I think to recognize that this is not something we like check, done. Now, everybody's culturally sensitive. It has to be embedded into a process that is ongoing and that promotes friendship between people, because that's what, I love what Brian Massengill says, transformative friendship, which would be a good way of explaining culture of encounter. So it's a constant ongoing, are we embedding this into our events? Are we using symbol and ritual? Are we using music? Are we using everything that really makes our Catholic ethos to serve into this sense that everyone is welcome here? So you have to be patient, and some people, it takes longer than others. Some people have kind of like a natural knack for it, others don't. But I think that doesn't mean we don't try. That's just a thought for those that are frustrated that the one workshop didn't work.
Well, and thank you. This is a wonderful way to kind of turn the corner here. That was really part of the effort that we had in putting together even this kind of a project. And that was not so that in 3 years we're through and done, but so that we begin and we practice and we work toward it. And even the book was not about, wow, we published something, but its goal, and actually that's where I so appreciate the Catholic Sisters Initiative, is make these resources available, like help people use them, encourage it. So I do encourage you to go on our Center for the Study of Consecrated Life website too, because we have a variety of lectures on there, also presentations. But the hope was that these resources would be used by you for conversation, for dialogue, for prayer, for community gathering. One of the questions was about the tension between mission and community. And I would just like to put that to rest, because religious life calls us to the mission we're called to is God's mission. Mission is not ministry, right? Like, we have to be very attentive when we're about the mission, we're about God's mission. And for religious life, that will include prayer, ministry, and community. All three of them are essential. So we're going to find different ways of living it, but the call toward and conversion toward interculturality is in all of these areas. And I think many of you are here because you are working on that and seeking to go more deeply. And this is an encouragement to your communities. This this conversation is recorded, and it'll be available in about a week and a half for you to use. Please share widely, have the conversations. I want to do two things. I want to thank people, and I want to tell you what we're doing next that really flows out of some of the comments about racism. So I want to first, thank all the people who participated in this. So starting with 21 congregations. One was the same congregation of men and women that said, you know what, let's partner and do this together. So, but all of you who stepped up in the midst of busy lives, and all of your congregations who said, because you had a project to do, all right, I want to be open. I will seek to be, to see what this is about and to learn. And all the questions that came up, all of our working through the theoretical to the real practical, I thank you. I thank all of the people who contributed, so all the presenters. We only were able to have some here today, but there's a lot in here, and it really took a global community to be about this. And really, again, the Hilton Foundation and the Catholic Sisters Initiative, who said, this is important, we want you to do it, go to it, and who are here tonight as well. So I thank you for that. And what that moves us to, actually, is the next step. So have your calendar handy, because out of this, we've all been living in this moment in all of our different places, but particularly here in the United States, as Tata said, what a moment, because you're finding interculturality, yes, speaks to racism as well, and a desire to engage. People have been asking about different groups. Why isn't this group speaking up on racism right now? Why isn't this? So the question was, where's religious life in this? And I know from, knowing a number of congregations, presenting, engaging, a lot of you are engaged in this, but we don't know that of one another. And the other piece is, this is a moment that, as Tata said, with the church and with the global community, to be a witness to what's calling and to where we stand on this. And so with that, I'd like to invite you to a 3-part series in November. And it's this, the title is A Call to Transformative Love in Religious Life. Stories of Race, Place, and Grace. This 3-part series, jointly sponsored by the Center for the Study of Consecrated Life and the National Black Catholic Sisters Conference. And they've been in touch with the Black Clergy Caucus. We begin, note that, we're not saying, 3 and done. We begin a conversation about the role of religious life in addressing and dismantling racial injustice. 3 sessions, and they're on consecutive Mondays, November 9th, November 16th, and November 23rd. Session 1 will sound familiar to people making comments tonight, sharing our histories and our stories. Session 2, looking back to look forward, acknowledging histories of enslaved persons by religious congregations. And session 3, how do we intentionally transform our congregations to be more welcoming, inviting, sustaining, and moving forward? The process we're using is going to be interactive. We will, in all of these areas, have a number of panelists in the conversation. And then we will invite you, if you wish, to go into a small group to talk to one another. And then we'll bring you back to the large group, and you'll see it. Every one of those sessions will ask a question: what's calling us forward? What's calling us next in light of racial injustice? And at the end, we'll be asking that again and saying, what are the fruits of this reflection? So it's really an honor. And again, this is also sponsored by the Hilton Catholic Sisters Initiative and their encouragement to be in conversation as these questions kept coming up. So it's really a privilege because I think we'll have a wonderful panoply, an incredible diversity of perspectives, engagement, and it's to begin some of the conversations that we need to have. So, and this is to do it together. So please let your communities, your friends, your colleagues know. We hope to have a flyer out in the next week and a half to send, and I hope you're on our mailing list. I think we have your email if you signed up. So it's our effort, you know, to say, so in light of interculturality, what's this moment where we are calling us? And I have found, even in my Vowed Life course, the sisters from Zambia are saying, we're watching this. We're watching how people dialogue, how they don't. We're watching what the religious are about. So this is a moment, not that we're saviors, we already have one, but it's a moment for us to try to engage. So it's the effort on the part of the Center for the Study of Consecrated Life here at CTU to begin some of these conversations and in a dynamic way that says, then where do we go? So November 9th, 16 and 23, I thank you so much for coming, for being here with us. I wish I could give you all a beverage and a snack so we could toast one another, but perhaps the best toast is if we live this. And so we thank our God for gathering us, and we ask the Spirit to guide us. All these people have drinks. I have my water. So, but thank you one and all. And it's just, it's a gift to be with you all. Keep asking the questions, keep engaging. And I hope we see one another again soon, and be in touch with us. Let us know what you're doing in light of this and how we can all learn from one another. So let the church here say amen.